All right, great. Thanks a lot, Katie. I appreciate that. I'm Joe Welinske. And before I even mention things about myself and this presentation, I just wanted to say that the very top of the chat has a link to supplemental resources, including this presentation, which is in an accessible Word document and also an accessible PDF format. And so that link is right at the top of the chat. It's bit.ly/3 lowercase c 3 lowercase h capital E lowercase h lowercase v, but it is right in the chat. If you go in there, you'll find those two formats for this set of slides, as well as a couple of other supplemental items that I'll mention as we get into the presentation. My pronouns that I go with are he and him, and right now you'd find me with a white shirt, a fedora covering my lack of COVID haircut, and I'm kind of on the older side, more toward the end of my career than the beginning, and so personally, I'm beginning to have many of the physical challenges that that we work with in accessibility regularly, with sight and hearing and mobility. So I look forward to doing this presentation. I mentioned to Katie that I am open to questions during the presentation. I don't tend to read my slides, so a lot of that will be supplemental. If you download the deck, you'll also have alt text for images. I'll describe images as I go through, just to add context for people that may benefit from that. And so this talk, Innovation in Accessible Design, a NASA case study. So this is a project that my organization, Blink, has been involved with for NASA. And first of all, I want to thank them for being just a great client, a wonderful partner to work with. And one of the things about working with an organization like NASA is that I'm able to talk to you about things. So there's a very open sense of sharing things, including the accessible design that I'm going to talk with you about today. So it's always fun to be able to talk about projects, whereas a lot of projects today often end up being constrained by NDAs and proprietary issues like that. Well, right now we're at the title slide for this presentation. I do use Word a lot for presentations in accessibility contexts because I'm able to control the accessibility of the presentation itself. The image that I have starting out is from one of the tools that we have available for our various research studies that my organization does, showing one of the participants of a accessibility study. That participant is blind, working on a Braille note laptop, and there are three different panes showing two views of the participant, as well as then showing the visual digital output from that laptop. So I mentioned that I work at Blink. I'm the accessibility director at Blink, and Blink is an evidence-driven design organization. We like to think we're a premier provider of research and design services, and we work with companies large and small around the world, and we're involved in the design of websites, applications, apps, mostly in the digital products and services, but we also get involved where that meshes with the physical world as well. And so as accessibility director, I have two main charges. One is to make sure that we evangelize to our clients the importance of investing in accessibility in all of the work that we produce, and the other is to help with our team to mentor everyone to be able to understand how accessibility fits into their individual roles, and I'll mention more about that later. I have a CPACC accreditation with IAAP. I also serve on what is the Puget Sound area or King County area metropolitan transit system on their Access Paratransit Advisory Committee called APAC. And I also am involved with our local meetup community, LEC. So it's just a little bit about myself. The image on this slide shows me working with a participant for another research study. That participant is working with both a laptop and also a assistive device that audibilizes speech. This project that I'm talking about is all about NASA, and I think most people are familiar with the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and you probably are familiar with the things that they're involved with. One of the probably the most recent with huge news is the landing of the Perseverance rover on Mars, and I was fortunate to be able to see it being built in a clean room through an observation window at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, California, over a year and a half ago. So it was exciting to know that that is now on the planet Mars. And one of the great things about NASA is that through all their research and development, which is about our universe and also hugely about our planet, our home planet, there's just a massive amount of content that they make available to the general public in addition to scientific organizations. So there's thousands of sites that are under the umbrella of NASA, and that comes under the umbrella of the project that I'm going to talk about today. Now, accessibility has always been important to NASA because as a government agency, it's covered by existing formal guidelines and legislation for accessibility. However, the implementation that's been spread out by all of the entities that make up those thousands of sites that I mentioned. I'm showing a screenshot of what you might see if you went to nasa.gov right now, which each entity does things a little bit differently, which is something that I'm going to talk about. And the things that I'm going to talk about today aren't yet in place. So we're still in the design phase of which this work is taking place. And the funding for the work that's going on is significant, not just for NASA, but other government organizations. And this goes back to legislation that came out in 2019 called the 21st Century Integrated Digital Experience Act, which is all about modernizing the websites and other digital services that our United States government provides, and it specifically underlines the need for all of that work to be accessible. Not that government organizations weren't already required to be attentive to that, but of 8 objectives in this legislative act, that's specifically laid out. And so right from the start, that created an opportunity and support within the stakeholders at NASA to make sure that we did good work with accessibility. And another thing that is interesting about this project was that despite how huge NASA is, they saw this as an opportunity to do a complete redesign of everything that is under that large NASA umbrella that I mentioned. And the idea is to consolidate the design of the websites. And in fact, they put a moratorium on new websites. And so despite the massive size of the legacy system that exists, this was an opportunity with accessibility to really start from scratch. So we were able to think about innovation, and as we move into development, making sure that we're attentive to accessibility from the very start. And so I mentioned that there's still a lot of work to be done. Quite a lot of the research and design work started in 2019, was aggressively worked on throughout last year. That continues this year going into development, and then it should be all released to the general public in 2022. And so the idea is that those thousands of different sites are now going to have a more cohesive and standard presentation, which definitely impacts being able to do better accessible design. And one of the things that we're able to do by having this legislative mandate is that we're involved with all the key stakeholders right from the start in NASA, and that accessibility was talked about from the very start and was included in the plans for all the milestones for the research, design, and then going into development. And so it's always exciting to be able to do that as well. And so I have an image on this slide that just shows one of the milestone project listings, and it identifies that every single milestone has an accessibility check-in. So different milestones would have different amounts of attention to accessibility, but there were check-ins planned from the very start for all of those milestones. And our philosophy at Blink is that the best accessibility happens when individual practitioners bring that into their own roles rather than there being an accessibility gatekeeper of sorts. So certainly it was my role to bring accessibility into the project, but then also to make sure that everybody involved in the project understood how to come up with their own ideas. So that included researchers, interaction designers, visual designers. We also had motion design involved. And so all the people on the team were either were already familiar with accessibility or understood what was, or started to bring that into their practice during this project. The first part of the project started right at the very start of 2020, and that was doing foundational research about the needs of NASA consumers of content, and so that was done with remote testing with thousands of people, and then individual interviews with dozens and dozens of participants for qualitative results. And so accessibility was included in that. So, for example, by knowing that accessibility was important, we were able to have questions in the remote surveys to identify the magnitude of accessibility needs. And so on this screen, it shows two pie charts, which, by the way, in the accessible version of this document, if you get it, I include the actual data for all the different pie chart elements. And I won't go into those in detail there, but that would be available to anybody that looks into the document. But essentially, the big numbers were that 17% of, or I'm sorry, 17% of the people not identifying as having a disability or accessibility needs had significant navigation issues with existing NASA properties. That increased to 30% for people that indicated that they had a disability or accessibility need. And we also were able to gather information about assistive devices, which of course is so important in helping to make sure that we're fully supported as we build out the design and go into development. Another part of research was to do a comparative component review. So before we even got into doing our own prototypes for designs, the designers had ideas about the types of components that they thought might fit into a system. But before we even went very far down that road, there was a review of other existing sites, not NASA, but sites, just general consumer sites that had those types of components. And so then there was a very thorough review of those sites for the various features to identify how well it appeared that accessibility was being done for those sites. And so although there were some limitations on what you're able to do there, it did bring in a lot of good findings of cautionary tales, as well as things that appeared to be successful as we moved into more detailed design at Blink. And on the screen, I have a sample page from that component review, and that document is included in the folder that I provided for the supplemental resources. So you'd be able to find that offline from this presentation. Also with research, it's important to bring into play at this point that at Blink we have a team that includes people with various physical challenges who are also experts in their own right with accessibility, and that gives us insights that we otherwise would not be able to have. So they're really important partners with us, members of our team. And the screenshot that I'm showing on this slide shows one of the contractors that has worked with us on many products. Zach is working here, being shown in a video frame where Zach is experimenting with the legacy NASA site using touch and audible interface on his iPhone, and we're also being able to monitor the visual display of that in another pane in that screen capture. And one of the things that Zach was involved with was reviewing legacy sites. Now, even though I mentioned that the past info is past websites were getting overhauled completely, it still was good to be able to see what some of the problem areas were in existing sites. And there's nothing there that wouldn't surprise people that are attending this conference, but it just again served to reinforce areas for us to be attentive to. And so we've made a lot of notes on those, and just things like gaps in keyboard only access, focus, complex objects like carousels and areas that require labels. And a screenshot on this page is just showing a legacy page where it's just flagged with a number of areas that were used in this legacy study. We looked at 40 sites that are currently out there under the NASA umbrella, and working with our contractor, Zach. Zach developed a rubric that had a scale, that had a scale identifying some attributes of the website, so that there was some way to provide a comparison of the different sites. And so then that was translated to numerical hierarchy for those issues, and then we're able to aggregate that. And so some of the issues that were included in that were the organization of menus, labeling, headings, alternative text. I already mentioned carousels and widgets, which I'll talk more about later. Again, things that most of the people in this audience are probably familiar with. But again, it gave us some background, and we can check in later to find out if, in fact, we're able to make substantive improvements on what was being done before. I'm going to go into the design part right now, but Kate, are there any questions pop up that you might want to bring up at this point?
Yeah, sure, Joe. There is one here that is from an anonymous attendee. It says, if there's no dedicated accessibility team, how does Blink guarantee accessibility experts are involved in development, or that someone becomes an expert?
Well, let's see. So possibly I didn't give enough background on our organization. So first of all, our organization has accessibility as one of the pillars of the organization. And so, in fact, my position as accessibility director, it was something that was significant for the organization. And so it's my job to make sure that accessibility is ever present in all of the types of activities that we're involved with. Now, in terms of building the team, one of the things that, again, is my responsibility is to make sure that everybody that works within Blink is able to gather the skills, acquire the skills that they need to be accessibility experts within their own domain. And we found that to be very helpful when a user experience person in general might look at the WCAG with its hundreds of recommendations. It's overwhelming. But if you meet with a visual designer or an interaction designer or a researcher and identify the things that are of particular importance in their role, then suddenly it simplifies things and makes things much easier. And so what I feel we've built is an organization where everybody either is or is intent on becoming an accessibility expert in the work that they do. Now, that doesn't mean that we always feel for any given project that we have all of the skills that we need. And that's why we work with contractors to make sure that we have the right people involved to be able to do, the work that we need for specific projects. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, that was very clear. Thanks, Joe. All right. Yeah, at this time, there aren't any further questions in the Q&A, so let's go ahead and move on.
All right, good. Well, I went through the research part, and so now I'm going into the design part, which followed on from that, using the findings from the researchers. And one of the another one of the important things at Blink that we think about is inclusive design, where we're able to get in early at the start of a project like this one, that we're able to start designing a system where everything works for everyone across the full spectrum of abilities, as opposed to having accessibility specific remediation. And so one of the biggest areas that's always a challenge is with navigation, and that's a challenge for everyone. And as we started in on the design for the navigation, our main designer, or one of the design team leaders, Tristan, was very attentive to things that we talked about with accessibility. And so the navigation system of nested menus, which in a lot of cases can be complex for everyone, I think he has a solution that works well for everyone. And there's a video link in the slide deck. If you get that, you can watch that offline. It's kind of hard to explain it, but we feel that the navigation scheme that we came up with, and then continuing on with testing that is still to come, is going to provide a good experience for everyone. And so that's one of the things that's always fun, to be able to work on a project like this, where everything is operating from a clean slate. Another thing that we're able to do as part of this project was have documentation that did accessibility specifications. And developers love specifications, and they love when specifications are really well done. And I think most people in the accessibility profession would be familiar with the problems when we're trying to do remediation. Many times because accessibility wasn't in the initial specification. In this case, not only was Blink doing the research and design, but we were also supplying a design system. And so that was to develop a hierarchy of objects, components, templates, so that different entities within NASA could create their own uniqueness for their site, while still maintaining a cohesive structure across all of NASA. And so everything that was documented within the user interface and the templates for the new design also had an accessibility component. And I have to give a nod to the Adobe accessibility team. They'd done some interesting work with a notation system that had a visual component to it. We added in a text component to that. And on the slide that I'm looking at now, there's two screen captures. One is showing the notation elements that are used in the design system to reference area collections, keyboard only tab orders, and other accessibility notations. And so I'll show you how that's used as we move further on. And then there's a screen capture also showing how there are detailed text descriptions associated with that as well. And so as the interaction design started getting more detailed, that meant that various templates were being identified as the ways that information would be presented, and often the visual design takes precedence, and accessibility elements only come into play quite late. But again, we were involved thinking about accessibility in every phase. And so in the design system, the tab order, key selections, and the instructions for developers for suggested interactions and acquiring focus for the UI elements was included in that documentation. Now, this is of course suggested at the developer phase. There, the individual developers, may come up with their own scheme, but at this point we just felt like we were going to give, our best representation of how we thought the experience of moving through content should be. And so the screen captures I have here are showing a certain type of page, in this case featured videos, which it has a master video that video is the primary video that is set up for that template. And then there's a description section following that, and then that's followed by supplemental videos that are in a thumbnail format, each with their own description. And there are blue tiles shown on that screen capture that indicate the keys and optimal tab order to move through. And the other screen capture is the detailed instructions about keyboard navigation. And again, being able to come in with a clean slate meant thinking about, once we got into thinking about keyboard only access, is thinking about ways that so many ways that to solve problems that we'd heard about again and again. So, for example, one of those is in search. And search, for people who may be using a keyboard only access and a screen reader, is often relegated in the tab sequence to fairly far along in that tab sequence, often because it's on a logical left to right at the right hand side of a set of menus. And so even though search can be one of the most important places for a person using a screen reader to begin exploring, it's often difficult to get to. And so we have an explore button, explore text box at the very beginning of the sequence. And so the top left orientation isn't going to be relevant to a person who is blind, but the fact that it's that first placement in the tab order means that it is immediately available. And there's a screen capture showing that placement along with the other tabs. That also carries over, thinking about accessibility as we move forward, also carried over into thinking about collections of content. So the NASA content tends to be very, have a lot of complexity to it. And so the idea of identifying clusters of content was really important. And so here's a screen, on this slide I have a screen capture showing nested collections and instructions for area landmarks. And on the visual design, it's another area. Now we have visual designers at Blink, and so um, their responsibility is to understand what's important for the things that that they're involved with. And so working with color contrast is in this case was handled by Megan and Mike at our organization. This design system was using the Figma design and development tool, and Figma has a nice plugin called Stark, and so that was used in doing the color contrast evaluations and building that into the design specification. And so the icons that are represented in the design specification have both color coding, but that color coding in Figma is also attached to the pass and fail labels so that the design system also is accessible. And the Stark plugin worked really well, and not that it may or may not be equal in features with other color contrast mechanisms, but having it as a plugin directly into Figma definitely was an efficient tool to use. And let's see, I'm just checking on my time. So Katie, looks like we're at like 14 minutes left. Is that right?
Yep, 14 minutes left in this session.
All right. Yeah, so let me just mention a couple more things quickly, and then you have some time for questions. So search engine optimization was another area that we were involved with. And so there was really great alignment between SEO and our accessibility work, because so many of the things that go into accessibility are directly providing signals to the search engine bots that crawl sites. And I think there might be another presentation on this topic. So that alignment between SEO and accessibility was a benefit that we made our clients aware of that they hadn't necessarily been thinking about. As we move into next steps, I mentioned a thing called complex objects. And in my experience with accessibility, there are always things that pop up in interactive websites that are not holistically designed for accessibility. They may technically be accessible, where there's some keyboard only access, there's some alt text descriptions for images, but then when a person with various physical challenges who may be blind using a screen reader, there's no context. And so you may have a complex object like a carousel that technically is enabled, but it hasn't really been designed to work well for a person with certain challenges. And so we flagged those items. That'll go into a later phase, because I found that complex objects like dashboards and carousels really it requires a conversation, an active conversation between a designer and a developer to have a good solution. There's also going to need to be training on good content development, so that there's an understanding of how to do things effectively in writing headings and developing alternative text. And that's completely separate from the design part, but we firmly believe that these business processes need to be enabled in order to make sure that these items are taken care of as the media is developed, rather than as remediation. And there was a session specifically about roles that was earlier in the conference today that talked about that a bit. Also a plan for how the presentation of data and tables. So there's a lot of that kind of information in NASA. It's not necessarily content that is on the front lines of the home pages, but it's there, and so there needs to be a plan for that. And then NASA also has just a massive library that continues to grow of PDFs because it's such a ubiquitous format, and that's not going to go away. And so there needs to be business processes and a content management system that makes sure that moving forward, PDFs are done in an accessible format. And then for us at Blink, we do have developers and have a great team for doing that. NASA's still working out what the development format will be for this year, but we're certainly hope to be a liaison for that work. There's certainly so many solutions for automated testing and for auditing content, and that is going to happen as well. Blink's perspective is if we've done everything right in the stakeholder work, in the research, in the design specifications, carrying that over into development, that significantly reduces the need for remediation at the audit portion of the process. We look to have a very clean audit at the conclusion of this process. And so in the, I won't go through the resources that I have here, but in detail, but if you download the document that I mentioned earlier, you'll have a lot of supplemental information, and I'm always open to getting comments from anyone at any time, because I enjoy collegial discussions. All right, well, that brings me to the end of my prepared slides. Katie, did you want to jump in with some other questions?
Yeah, we've got some really great questions out here. So let's take a look at what Joe has to say. So Joe says he loves to hear how your team approached improving the accessibility of the information architecture across so many sites. Thinking not only about menu and navigation design, but how do you account for information foraging and, in quotes, berry picking in browsing?
Well, Joe, that's a really big question. One of the things that we hope is going to happen here is that by this standardization process, the number of templates that represent all the different entities under the NASA umbrella, the number of templates will actually be relatively small. That still will allow a lot of freedom of expression for those individual organizations on how they want to present their site. But if they're using the templates and the components that are part of the design system, ideally, the plan is that that's going to take care of a lot of issues. So they'll feel flexibility, yet there's going to be constraints that are going to then, hopefully, the accessibility will come through from that. And follow up with me by email if you want to go into that further.
Sounds good. All right. Ted says NASA loves acronyms. What is your standard for making them accessible?
Well, that's a really good question. So that would fall under the next steps content development portion, so for content development, that's not something that Blink is going to be necessarily charged with. We're not a content development organization, although we do that to some level. But NASA already has a huge number of people writing copy creating videos, doing illustrations. And one of the things that we want to do as part of the design system is bring in that type of thing to the business process. So as part of the content development design system, it would be that acronyms are handled, and so that enough information is provided if somebody is using a screen reader to be able to understand what that's about. So it's a big problem, and I think it's mainly solved through that business process. But one other place is that NASA is also going to have a new content publishing system, and a great place for flagging that is if the content publishing system can notice when an acronym is being added into the system, and then require a proper full writing of whatever that represents.
Sure, that makes sense. So this next question is kind of similar and might have kind of a similar answer to how does your team approach copywriting, especially when dealing with scientific content that might feel dense and complex?
Yeah, that's another great question, and again, we wouldn't be the copywriters on a daily, weekly basis at NASA. There's a huge number of people that do that, and they do that well. But your question is a good one. It's a business process, but there's a deeper level when you think about cognitive challenges, and that requires a very it's an area that I don't think digital product and service designers have done a good job of overall to represent content well for people with significant cognitive issues. And so our thought is that we want everyone to benefit in some way from every page of content that's there, and so then a business process can be layering, which is what's a big picture idea that can be presented when a person first is exposed to this, whether a screen reader or processing it visually or otherwise. And then can that be layered with deeper and deeper content so that a person who may not be able to process the deeper content can still enjoy the majesty, the excitement of the things that NASA is involved in.
That makes sense. All right, I think, we should have time for one more question. Let's see. Okay, this one's a little bit technical. Regarding placing an Explore button near the top of the tab order, my understanding is that a skip to content link should be the first focus on tab. There's a second piece of it. Do you recommend having the Explore element be the next focused item after a user selects skip to content?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. That does start to get into the technical details that then bleed into or start to move into the developer sphere. And so skip to is something that's used in NASA already, not necessarily consistently across those thousands of sites, but then certainly this would be one of the things that the design and developers would determine to identify the best way to integrate that. But that's a good point, that in the underlying markup code, that might be the first place that the screen reader would report on a mechanism to further navigate.
Sure.
But not to get it would be great to have more discussion about that, but like one of the issues is really designing it so that the skip to isn't an artifact of not having done a great inclusive design from the start, and recognizing where it is helpful and makes the system overall better for everyone.
Really great point there, Joe. Yes, thank you. All right, it looks like our time is up for this session today. So Joe, thank you so much for the great session, great content, and for fielding these questions here at the end. And thanks to all the attendees here at the session. As a reminder, the link to supplemental artifacts is in the chat, and then the slide deck will be available also on this webpage, as well as the recording later after XCon concludes. So thanks everyone for joining us today, and hope to see you again tomorrow at XCon. Take care, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.